Welcome everyone to another episode of the Camper Report. Today we've got a person that I've been talking to for a while. Again, it was a busy time in his life because he got graduated. He was a senior in high school. Rohan Chakravarthi, everyone. Welcome to the show, and it's good to have you on. And obviously, it's probably pretty freeing now that you're out of high school, so that should be exciting as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for having me on. And yeah, I'm definitely excited to talk 49ers for the next hour or so.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We're going to go over a few things that, have been burning in my mind. I wanted to pick your brain about it. So let's get right to it. The first topic that we have, and I mean, a lot of people will criticize like what the 49ers, their draft and their free agencies. And, my thing is like everyone has those mistakes. Everyone has draft mistakes. Everyone has their 49ers are usually not very aggressive in free agency. But is the front office underrated as far as like the people that they draft and get in free agency? Because they're about to have at least three players that they've drafted, and Trent Williams was drafted with Kyle Shanahan by Kyle Shanahan in Washington. Are they going to have are they underrated because they're going to have like three players that are high? George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and Nick Bosa are soon going to be all the highest paid players at their positions. George Kittle already is. So are they underrated considering that they have already four players that are going to be soon to be four players that are going to be the highest paid at their positions?
Yeah. I mean, if a lot of people like to throw out the word underrated out there, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it's an overused word. When we look at the Shanahan Lynch regime, I don't think they're underrated. And I'll say why.
Yeah.
The 49ers over this past 5 years, I mean, we've seen the. I don't really care as much for the win-loss record that Shanahan has compiled, given the injury history that the 49ers have had, especially at the quarterback position, which essentially dictates how good a team will perform in that
Yeah.
current. You do talk about certain things, right? How the 49ers have high paid players at
Mm-hmm.
various positions, especially ones of importance. Edge rusher Nick Bosa is probably going to top the market this year. Debo
Mm-hmm.
Samuel there as well. He'll probably top the market. Those are the impending extensions. We did pay Trent Williams top of the line money. We paid Fred Warner, who is now the highest paid middle linebacker in the NFL. We paid George Kittle. And then,
Yeah.
not to mention, we also paid Ark Armstead pretty top of the line money, if not I know it's not like number one for defensive tackles or interior defensive linemen, but it is pretty high up there as
Yeah.
well. So essentially, overall, including the contract of Jimmy Garoppolo, we have 6, 7 guys being paid top of the line money, showing the 49ers' willingness to spend. Now, about the narrative that the 49ers don't spend in free agency, I tend to disagree with that. It's
Yeah.
just hasn't been as successful as other teams have necessarily done so, right? When you look back in the 49ers past, right? Especially in
Mm-hmm.
this week. We've paid guys like D Ford. We've paid Quan Alexander. We even traded for Emmanuel Sanders, right? And just this season, we just paid Traveris Ward top of the line cornerback money to be our cornerback number one. I don't think that it's true that we haven't paid players. It's just it hasn't necessarily worked out to, let's say, the Rams, right? Where the
Yeah.
Rams, when they pay players, it's normally high end caliber players or players that a lot of people know, like the brand name
Yeah.
players opposed to a Traveris Ward, who many people might not believe to be a cornerback one, even if the stats indicate elsewhere. Now, I think that the combination of misses, but also the immense amount of strengths, I think outside of the 49ers fans, it's pretty well respected from other people, which is why I'll say they aren't underrated. You can consider them slightly underrated, but I do think that there is a good amount of people that
Mm-hmm.
respect what this regime has done, especially with the quarterback fallacies that we've had.
Yeah, I think the 49ers this year, and especially like this is a prove it year for during the draft because they took a lot of risk, you could say, because they passed up on Darian Kennard to get the I believe it was the guy from what's his name? The right tackle or whatever his
Spencer
name is.
Burford.
Yeah, Spencer Burford. So they passed up. I don't know if you knew who Darian Kennard was, but I wanted them to draft him and maybe put him at like right guard or whatever. But anyways, so I think this is definitely going to be a prove it year for the 49ers because they have guys that they took risks on. They obviously got an edge rusher, Drake Jackson, who good player, but there was other needs, and there was other players that I wanted them to get. So this is a prove it year. I feel like for them in the draft. And again, you're a team that they're held in a high standard. They have to perform every year, and for the most part, they have. But the way, you're not always going to be right, and they're obviously not always right. I think the DeForest Buckner thing was a little bit ridiculous, but not every team is perfect, and that's what you have to take with this team. But again, I'm hoping that they're willing to admit from their mistakes that they made in the past. And again, I hope that they can move on in the future and really like fix those mistakes, because Mike McGlinchey, like, you'll bring that up as well. The mistake that they made in I believe it was 2018, 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you can bring that up. Well, every team has that. Every team will have that like really bad mistake that you make earlier on. And it's just the way the NFL goes. So I don't think it's unnormal. But yeah, hopefully that they can prove themselves this year. And if Trey Lance and everything works out, they're gonna be called geniuses. The front office is going to be if Trey Lance works out, they're gonna be praised, and they're going to be called one of the smartest organizations of all time. So, yeah, that's what I got to say on that.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about some of the mistakes, right? I don't necessarily think Mike McGlinchey has been a mistake. I think he's actually been a pretty solid, pretty
Yeah.
average right tackle. It's just you expect sometimes a little more from the eighth overall pick. And really, I don't think the mistake is on the player. I think it's just on the value based on whoever else was there. The 49ers early in the rounds, like the reason a lot of 49er fans harp on the front office is because when the 49ers go best player available over the need that is presiding them at the moment, they normally tend to draft well. You look in the later rounds, especially in the third round and behind, they've
Mhm.
drafted Brett Warner, George Kittle, DJ Jones, and they've had a ton of
Yeah.
success with drafted free agent pool. It's a countless amount of names you can talk about. From last year's roster, you can talk about Jawan Jennings, who was just a seventh
Yeah.
round, right? And guys like that. So they have success in the later rounds when they normally choose best player available just because you're
Yeah.
trying you're taking flyers, you're adding depth. But in the earlier rounds, when you look at the 49ers drafting philosophy prior to this year, in 2018, they took the right tackle because they needed an offensive lineman over one of the better players in the safeties available. There
Yeah.
was there at 17, I believe, and that was a guy that many wanted the 49ers to take. I understand that a lot of people wanted Roquan Smith, who had the pick before, to the Chicago Bears. You go to 2018, or sorry, that was 2018. You
Yeah.
go to 2019, Nick Bosa, Debo Samuel, both were the top of the needs, and of course, both worked out. I think Nick Bosa was a no-brainer given he fell to number 2, and then
Yeah.
Debo was one of the top receiver weapons. Like I think he was the second drafted receiver in that class, so he was one of the top weapons still available. But then look, fast forward to 2020. The first two picks are Javon Kinlaw and Mike McGlin, or sorry, not Mike McGlinchey, Javon Kinlaw and Aaron Banks.
Oof.
Javon Kinlaw, the jury's still out on him. I don't really go like you have to see what he has on the field,
Yeah.
right? The problem is he just hasn't been on the field, so I won't take that against him. But the 49ers could have used a talent at right tackle in Tristan Wirfs, or even just a versatile offensive guard who's been at a Pro Bowl level, and he was
Mhm.
there at 13. They could have taken one of the top receivers and gone BPA, even if receiver wasn't the biggest need. They could have taken one of the receivers at 13.
CD Lamb.
Exactly. CD Lamb, Jerry Judy, really all the top receivers were available at 13. And so the point I'm trying to make here is the 49ers, when they go BPA, or sorry, when they go need over
Yeah.
BPA, they tend to miss sometimes, which hurts them, especially because they're going need over BPA in the early rounds. And that's where I think some of the 49er fans tend to harp on the organization because they understand that this team can draft well. It's just they want them to utilize the philosophy that has allowed them to draft well rather than go for the traditional route, which is need over BPA early.
Yeah, I mean, again, I remember when CD Lamb got drafted. I remember when we traded down and then the Bucks got Wirfs. I was like, I literally I thought CD Lamb was coming to the 49ers. I wanted him so badly. And then they draft like Javon Kinlaw. I'm like, what? Like, so I mean, they have that tendency to do that. And again, Nick Bosa, this year, if everything works out, nobody's gonna like. I think this year is going to be they've made these moves, and if it works out, it's going to be it's going to be a historical year for them, and nobody's going to be talking about this anymore. So this year's a huge prove it year for them. And again, if Nick Bosa, and they've really loaded up on their defense, I think it's going to be an exciting year. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Let's
agree.
get let's get to the next topic here. Which rookies are you most excited to see, and which ones will get the most opportunities? We talk about, the ones that I think there's a big difference between which ones you're excited to see and which ones are going to get the most opportunities, because we really don't know. Take last year, for example. You had, let's say you had Lenore or whatever. I mean, I wasn't excited really to see him, and he got the start earlier on. Like, I was more excited to get see Ambry Thomas. So which ones are you excited to see, and which ones do you think will get the most opportunities?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, when we talk about the 49ers drafting philosophy over the past 2 years, I think of the Shanahan Lynch era, right? In the early stages, it was different because they
Hmm.
were they were often drafting early. They had a poor roster.
Hmm.
Roster in 2017 that they inherited was one of the worst in football, right? I think they went 2-14 the year before. So it was one of the worst in football. So you're obviously always drafting high, just trying to add contributors to your team early on. So that was like the early part. And I understand their first draft wasn't amazing from the top, right? You had Solomon Thomas as your first pick and things like that, and Reuben Foster as well in that draft. But over the first 3 years of that, especially after that 2019 season when we drafted number 2 overall, the 49ers, they've now shifted from drafting extremely early and drafting solid contributors
Yeah.
early to now in the past 2 years, because they've been at that premier level, right? Because they haven't necessarily been drafting early, and because they made the trade up for Trey Lance, where they didn't have a ton of those like picks in those second, third, and fourth round. Now, I think the drafting philosophy has changed in 21 and 22.
Mm.
It's not necessarily only drafting for that present year, but you have bodies for that present year,
Yeah.
especially those veterans. After the COVID year, all these 49ers re-signed to one-year deals, knowing that, anticipating that they get better deals in from other teams in the future. And you saw that this past year. K'Wan Williams went to the Denver Broncos on I think on a 1 year like $4 million deal.
Hmm.
DJ Jones went on a 3 year deal. Laken Tomlinson went on a 3 year deal. And a couple of other pieces, right? Like a Tom Compton and all these like just depth pieces, they all left because they got more money elsewhere. And the point I'm trying to make is the 49ers now have anticipated this for the year past, right? That
Hmm.
Aaron Banks was selected specifically to replace Laken Tomlinson in his natural position of left guard. You have
Hmm.
cornerbacks now that serve as depth for the ones that left in Ambry Thomas and maybe even Diameter Lenore if he cracks the roster, right? And so it's not only drafting for the year present, but it's also drafting for the future years. And I think we anticipate to see that with some of our draft picks, like a Nick Zakel, who I think is the more pro ready
Oh,
lineman, who could
yeah.
slot center in 2023 after taking a year of seasoning in the NFL at a
Yeah.
position he played before. Like, that's a premier example. But if you're talking about the guys that I'm looking forward to in terms of opportunity, I think the two names that scream to me are Tyron Davis Price and Drake Jackson. I think Drake Jackson has a chance to be a guy who contributes on the defensive line early, specifically because he presents something the 49ers don't necessarily have with that elite bend. And so that the physical traits that Nick Bosa said he didn't really have in his fresh or in his rookie year, and other players have been raving about. I think those are going to be shown on field. And while it translates to on-field success, that's yet to be determined. But I think he'll get some opportunity during his rookie year. And Tyron Davis Price, I think he and our guy Elijah Mitchell
Hmm.
going to form a pretty solid 1-2 punch. You know, the 49ers are trying to go younger in that running back room, trying to get more tread in the legs, opting to go away from guys like Raheem Mostert, right, this past offseason. And now you have Mitchell, Davis Price, and
Yeah, it's deeper.
Trey Sermon
Yeah.
alongside guys like Jeff Wilson, Jordan Mason, and JaMychal Hasty as a pretty solid, young, and experienced running back room. So I think that those are the two guys that get the most opportunity, and respectfully so, given that they were the first two to be selected in this draft.
Well, what you said about Drake Jackson before I get my names is interesting, because I think what's Samson Ebicom, I think will probably start off starting, but I'm not sure if he's gonna finish it. And with Chris Kasurik, a very good coach, like, I think he could really develop very fast, and you could see by the end of next year him being really come along as his own. And I compare him to what Nick Bosa was, and or as far as like the opportunity that he's going to get, as far as like I compare it to what Nick Bosa did in 2019, because I think they have a good defensive line. They have another, like Nick Bosa had a pretty good edge rusher. He had a good defensive line around him as well. The 49ers have a deeper defensive line. They have good edge rushers, everything else. So I think Drake Jackson's going to get similar opportunities to what Nick Bosa got in 2019. But I'm not going to say him. I'm going to say, obviously, Davis Price is an interesting one, because I think Elijah Mitchell, I think they're going to take the workload off of him. And that's going to be important as well. So you could see him getting like 14, 15, maybe even 16 carries a game. And he's going to be a main red zone back. So you could see him getting like, I could see him getting like 8, 9 touchdowns next year. And that could be a huge year for him as well. So him as well. But I think that's the guy that I think is going to get the most opportunities. The guy I'm most excited to see is Sam Womack. And
Exactly.
I think he's also going to get opportunities as well, because if he can show out, I think the 49ers are really having a good competition as far as like their nickelback corner room. They don't know who it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be. I mean, would it be Jason Verrett? I'm not sure. Do you think he could slide over to nickel?
I don't think Jason Verrett starts this year on the 53-man roster. I honestly
Oh,
Niners will place him on one of the injury lists just to help him, not only to help him get acclimated back after his injury, regardless of whether he plays on training camp or not, but also to get another guy on the roster. They have a deep, deep cornerback room right now with a ton of guys. And even if it's
yeah.
not at the like position, they have a ton of players that could compete on a 53-man roster, be it with the 49ers or elsewhere. And they might want to stash an additional player there, be it a veteran or be it one of their youngsters. And so that's how I'm looking at it right now. I think that while Verrett is going to probably compete if he can show that he is a shell of his former self, at least some part of his former self, I think he competes as the season goes on, but I don't think he starts the year on the 53-man roster.
So do you think they could stash him on the practice squad?
I
No team would
I,
recognize him.
I think they put him on the physically unable to play list where he
PUP.
sits,
Oh, okay.
yeah, for the first 6 weeks, and then he gets acclimated after that. Be some kind of roster move. Be they put him on the practice squad, or they shelve him on the 53-man roster and put maybe a guy like Dante Johnson on the practice squad,
Mhm.
and then elevate him on game days as a part of the 55-man roster.
I kind of agree with that, actually, because now that I'm looking at it, like it would be either him or Ambry Thomas. And I think Ambry Thomas is younger. He doesn't have as many injury issues. So, like, if you're a team, if you're cutting him, and if you're a team looking at Ambry Thomas compared to Jason Verrett, you're saying, okay, well, Ambry Thomas, if you cut Ambry Thomas, there are teams out there that are like, they're bad. There are bad teams that would be like, oh, like Ambry Thomas is a great young player that could really turn into something. So we'll pick him up. So I actually agree with that as well. I could see the offensive linemen, though, like any of them really that we drafted, get a opportunity. Obviously, Nick Zakel and also Spencer Burford, because honestly, like I see Mike McGlinchey, and yes, he's probably will probably get the opportunity to start if he's healthy. But when have we actually ever seen Mike McGlinchey start a full year without getting injured? Like there's a high possibility that he does get injured. So I think Mike McGlinchey might, I mean, again, you might have one of those rookies or Spencer Burford sliding in for Mike McGlinchey week 7 because he gets injured or something like that. So I could see that as being a high possibility as well, and Spencer Burford getting a shot at that as well.
I will push back on that just a little bit. McGlinchey obviously is coming. I'm not necessarily worried about McGlinchey's injury history, but I'm worried about McGlinchey's past, the one that just happened, because it is a serious
Mhm.
torn quadriceps injury that does impact a player's movement, especially, which is important, not only in movement, but also the power, two things that McGlinchey is predicated on as an offensive lineman. So I think that that's important as an offensive lineman. Do I think that Burford gets the opportunity if McGlinchey somehow gets injured or has a slow start? I don't think so. I think Burford right now is the third string right tackle. I think Justin Skule will actually
Okay.
start. I think, Skule has been the starter, and it does say a good amount because Skule is coming off an injury himself, I think a torn Achilles, if I'm not mistaken, or an ACL, one of the two.
I think
He's
it's
coming off.
ACL.
It might be ACL, but
Yeah.
immediately inserted as the first team right tackle
Yeah.
the entirety of the offseason program. And it's the reports have been pretty good about Justin Steele. So I do think that he will be the backup swing offensive lineman, just like the 49ers envisioned for him last year before he got hurt and positioned Jalen Moore in that spot. So I do think that Burford and Zakel will be quality offensive linemen, but I do think that the 49ers also want to try and keep them at one position rather than move them across the offensive line. So I think that they will be relegated to interior positions for 2022 as backups.
Yeah, and I think the 49ers, they have a lot of like I feel like they have a lot more plug and play, like not like necessarily good starters, but they have a lot of guys that I think they trust and that they've drafted to just plug and play that. And I mean, that's a guy like you mentioned, Justin School. That's a guy that I want to see start ahead of Mike McGlinchey. But he's gonna have a great competition with Jalen Moore and possibly I think Aaron Banks probably will start at left guard, but I mean, there's going to be tons of guys to compete at every single position. Like they have a bunch of guys who can play for 4 different positions along the line. So that's exciting as well. And maybe even Colton McKivitz gets a shot at right tackle as well.
Yeah, I think they like McKivitz at tackle. Like I said, I think the 49ers are trying to keep guys on one side of the offensive line. I think McKivitz stays on the left side, be it at left tackle or left guard,
Hmm.
the position that he originally played in college. He could also kick out to tackle like he did last year, playing 2 games in place of Trent Williams, especially that Week 18 game where he did hold his ground against one of the top defensive linemen in Von Miller last year against the Rams in that must-win game. So I think the 49ers, they are pretty content with their offensive line. And one thing I want to point out about 49ers and offensive linemen, while they might not be household names, the 49ers, they've struggled at times to develop players to become elite offensive linemen. But when
Hmm.
you talk about these backup level below average level offensive linemen, the 49ers have found a way to make these guys into like somewhat valuable players, right? Like Tom Compton last year. In general, Tom Compton is not by any means a good
Yeah.
player. But you saw the PFF stats at times last year, right? Tom Compton was graded as one of the top run defenders or run blockers last year at the right tackle position. And the 49ers made Tom Compton look serviceable, right? And it's not the first time that they've done that. And it probably won't be the last time that they've done that with this Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch regime. So to me, I think the 49ers, they feel confident in their offensive linemen because they've done it before. That's why I do, it's not that I have high hopes, but I do think that they feel confident in Jake Brendel as their starting center. I also do think that they feel confident at whoever wins that right guard spot. And there are factors to say, at least there are factors to argue why
Hmm.
you should feel confident in both.
Yeah, I don't know about the Jake Brendel thing. We'll see. Like, I think what he started a few years ago, didn't he start like the second half of the Cardinals game, week 1, a few years ago?
He
Or
might
was
have.
that somebody else?
I don't remember off the top of my head. It might have been Brunskill or it could have been Kilgore too. It might have been one of those guys.
Yeah.
But Brendel has gotten Brendel is an interesting guy. He's gotten starts before. Like the one time that he started really, or at least was played in a
Hmm.
start capacity was against the not against, but was with the Miami Dolphins back in 2018. He started 3 games in the early part of the season, but then he faced a season-ending injury, which is one cause for concern because the one
Yeah.
time given the opportunity, he got ended up injured, causing some durability concerns. But I do think that there is promise with Brendel, at least for 2022, due to a number of factors. First of all, Brendel fits what the 49ers want in an offensive lineman. He's
It's
the
true.
most athletic guy out of his draft class back in 2016 when he went undrafted. I think it was, yeah, 2016 when he went undrafted. Posted a 994 RAS score ahead of all the other big names in his draft class. And while he went undrafted due to play concerns, the athlete in him
Mhm.
is there. That's really important in a 49ers offense that requires offensive linemen to be agile. He also has the rapport with Trey Lance. Last year, right, was his first year in a 49er uniform. He was a second team center. And while Garoppolo played with Alex Mack, Lance was taking all of his reps in the offseason with Jake Brendel, which carried over to the scout team last year. And now this offseason, when you fast forward to it, both of them are playing together on first team, right? Brendel is the first
Mhm.
team, Lance is the first team quarterback. And while Lance has called protections before at his career in NDSU. He has the mind for it. Jake Brendel's actually the one calling all of the protections on the offensive line, which I thought to be fairly revealing because it shows that his mind has the capacity to call plays And it also is an important thing in Kyle Shanahan's offense. He talked about it with Alex Mack. And if Brendel has the capacity to do that, I think that's also important. And it also shows some faith that he could at least be somewhat of a serviceable
Yeah.
starter for 49ers. And the last thing I'll point out is the relationship with the 49ers and offensive line coach Chris Forster. He's not like a star player, right? He's just a quality backup when he was in Miami. And so why did the 49ers go after him? Well, he got the stamp of approval from offensive line coach Chris Forster, who specifically pinpointed Brendel as the one offensive lineman he wanted to bring
Mm.
uh, from Miami to the 49ers. And when the 49ers couldn't get him because of the COVID season, he opted out. They went back and tried to re-sign Brendel in 2021, and now he's in his second season, but really third with the playbook with the 49ers. So he's more accumulated in this offense and the complexities of the Shanahan offense as well.
That's a good point, and I didn't know all of that about, like, him playing for Miami, and that's interesting because really, now that you've kind of opened my eyes a little bit, I think you could definitely say that he just hasn't, like, gotten, I guess, enough opportunities maybe, and that's why, and the 49ers would, like, really like him, and again, the 49ers have been able to make do with average centers, like, I mean, when Alex Mack went down, but the year before, I think they were able to plug,
They
Brunsko in
had
there, so
Brunskill there, and then before that, they also had another average center. It was, I believe, Ben Garland. Ben Garland, yeah.
Garland, yep, Garland, and Garland was actually pretty good. We won, I believe quite a few games with him in 2019 because what's his name went out in the Saints game, so we won. I don't know how many games with him, but yeah, that's interesting as well. So, good to keep in mind, and thanks for the history. But one last question about the center thing before we move on. So
So,
you don't think they'll make any move to even try to get Treader or the guy, I don't know, I keep forgetting his name, but the guy from the Panthers who tore his ACL last year.
Matt Freitas.
Yeah, you don't think they'll make any move to get him?
No, I
Or
don't. Kyle Shanahan during the OTA period, when he was asked that question in the or during one of the media availability times, he was asked whether the 49ers considered all options at center
Mhm,
during the offseason and why they ultimately went with the current group that they have, which is Brendel, Keaton Sutherland, obviously post Alex Mack retirement, but Brendel, Keaton Sutherland, maybe Nick Zakelj, and Donovan West, with the three of the names that I mentioned being the 1, 2, and 3 stringers. So he talked about how they did go through all the options in free agency. They found out like after going through the options in free agency, they ultimately were more confident in the guys that they had right now. They also went through the options in the draft, and it is somewhat reasonable because obviously Brendel's been in with the system for an
mhm,
entire year, whereas you have to teach a free agent offensive lineman. He also has a rapport with Lance. And one other thing that I want to point out, Brendel was actually active for all 16 games for the 49ers last year. A lot of
yeah,
times, backup offensive linemen are inactive on game day. The 49ers don't necessarily always carry 9 or 10, they normally carry 8. But Brendel was active for all 16 games, meaning if an injury occurred, he almost certainly would have been that center that would have been plugged in to play. But that just shows to us that really, I don't think that despite JC Tretter's name being out there, and I know a lot of people wanted
mhm,
him, myself included at times, I think that they didn't necessarily view Tretter as the guy for 2022, probably because of the injury history, which limits his practice time, which is the most
mhm,
important time with Trey Lance, right? You need that center quarterback relationship to develop. And if
right.
Tretter's every single week because of his like just because he wants to remain as durable as possible for game day, you're not getting the needed reps. And Trey Lance has to now divert from one center to another on game days, which isn't the healthiest relationship going into year one as a starter in the NFL.
Yeah, and it's all like Kyle Shanahan's all about trust. We have the Kyle Shanahan trust tree or whatever. And especially like I think the only way the 49ers would get a center like JC Treader is if they were to cut Jimmy Garoppolo because right now they don't have enough money to. But the only way they do that, and I think they're gonna wait to do that. There's no way they're cutting him today. Like, so you have to I mean, not only like you have to develop a again, an interesting thing that just came up is Alex Mack last year. was a new center as well for the 49ers, but he had played behind Kyle Shanahan. But also, you had a veteran, and I know a lot of people like to hate on Jimmy Garoppolo, but you had a veteran in Jimmy Garoppolo who has known the system for a long time. So he knows different centers. He will play with different centers. But again, like you said, with a rookie like Trey Lance, you're going to have, you need a guy that he knows because he doesn't know as many systems. He doesn't know the playbook maybe as well. So you, that's a good point. I mean, closing in on the season, since the season is rapidly approaching, you have to right now sign a center. Otherwise, it's too late because then you're gonna have no time. And really, center is the most complicated part in Kyle Shanahan's playbook. So, I mean, that's gonna be tough if you sign a center right now because it takes years to learn a playbook for Kyle Shanahan. So, yeah.
Right. And one other factor on the center talk is when you talk about JC Treader, it could be just JC Treader doesn't want to sign right now. Treader could just be looking to,
Yeah.
like, during training camp or post training camp when he gets a starting opportunity, or even during the season. He might not be in talks to sign right now. He might be waiting, and obviously you can't wait when you have a rookie quarterback in need of those reps, like I said earlier. And so that might be another factor in it. Obviously, that's speculation. I'm not speaking for JC Treader or speaking to the point that's facts, but that could be one thing given his age and given his responsibilities as the NFLPA president.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Carcast, what up, Ben? Shout out Carcast. Go subscribe to him. And then what's up, Rohan? Two of the best. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah. You're like a walking dictionary. Like if I need some 49ers like stat brought up from like 3 years ago, I can ask you. So it's funny. It's funny for sure. Let's move on though to the next topic. Does Kyle Shanahan again? This year, Jimmy Garoppolo, I mean, there's a lot of news coming out about Trey Lance and how he's so good. And again, now that like supposedly Kyle Shanahan now has his quarterback, and with all these pieces in place, the receiver room being very deep, the running back room being very deep, the defense finally has corners and everything else. So is this the year that Kyle Shanahan makes two consecutive playoff runs? He hasn't really had he hasn't had two consecutive winning seasons, which is hard to think because we all love to praise him. Is this year that he finally has all the pieces to make those two winning seasons? And I'll just say this. If he doesn't have a winning season this year, I might be a little bit disappointed because he has the pieces in place to. And he really should have two winning seasons.
Yeah, and I mean, when we talk about Kyle Shanahan and the fact that he hasn't had two winning seasons, really the reason that he didn't have a winning season in 2020 following the Super Bowl run was injuries,
Injuries.
right? And so I think when we talk about the team on paper, this team is a playoff team. Where whether they win the division or not, that's a question that is yet to be answered. So I don't know about that, but right now, just on paper, this team is a playoff team. We have a quarterback who we believe can win us football games. And even with Jimmy Garoppolo, right, a quarterback who certainly had his flaws and his things that were good about him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we won a good amount of games, not only in 2019 but also in 2021. We've added, like you said, pieces to certain places where we were struggling last year, and not necessarily struggling, but we've bolstered certain
Mm-hmm.
parts of our group of our roster that needed that help, like special teams, like defense in the secondary. Right, we got Charvarius Ward as a cornerback. We've signed guys like Ray McLeod, who not only are going to be special teamers, but also contribute on defense or on offense as a receiver. And we've really, the most important part is the development of our players. We're a young roster. A lot of our players are pretty young, like the receiver group specifically, where you have
Mm-hmm.
Debo, Brandon Ayuk, and an extra year of development and an extra year really of learning the system and getting into the ebbs and flows, and is going to help start strong, right? One problem with Brandon Ayuk is he has started slow in both of the first 2 years and hasn't necessarily compiled a consistent stretch of 16 games of excellent football, right? That's the one issue. But now, going into his third season when receivers tend to break out in the system, you can expect Brandon Ayuk to start the ball off
Yeah.
running. and really try and get into that 1,000-year goal. Our defensive line was one of the top 5 in the NFL last year, and we just added pieces to that defensive line this year. We lost DJ Jones and Arden Key, but supplanted them with other players, such as the arrival of Javon Kinlaw, who should be back from injury this year, and several other edge pieces who should get a bolstered role and fill in that Arden Key issue alongside Drake Jackson, our second round pick. So I think that this team is a playoff team. I do think that Kyle Shanahan, barring any significant injuries, especially to the quarterback, should be able to get bolster this or kind of have this roster make a back-to-back playoff run.
Yeah, and you're also talking about a second-year defensive coach now that should have been hired for a head coach year. Like he's a genius coach. What's his name? What D'Amico Ryans. He's a genius coach because anyone after their first year of being a defensive coach that has success, like anyone that is already being looked at from NFL teams for a head coaching position is going to be a genius in their first year of being. And I mean, he's been in a lot of NFL system. He's been a player, but like him in his second year now, probably I'm expecting it for him. Like I'm expecting this to be his last year for the 49ers, but you have him as well. You have a more experienced defensive coach. You have a good quarterback, which I expect him to be like maybe not posting the stats as Matt Ryan did in 2016, but I expect him to be closer to what Kyle Shanahan had it like with Matt Ryan in 2016. And if you can have that, then you can win like with any like you can win with any team. If you can have a Matt Ryan like that team in 2016 was really good with what Kyle Shanahan has had as the offensive coordinator. So it's going to be important. He has the quarterback in place. He has the receivers in place. He is basically everything. And again, if he loses this year, I think it's going to be a disappointment. And I think you have to make at least, I don't think it's Super Bowl or bust. Do you think it's Super Bowl or bust for them or no?
Yeah, I mean it depends on in what scope. I think that the goal, like I think the team has Super Bowl aspirations. I think they're a Super Bowl contender, being a top 4 team in the NFC West. But if you're saying should Kyle Shanahan be fired if he doesn't reach the Super Bowl, then I disagree. I don't think
No.
any circumstance that Kyle Shanahan can do to be fired this season. But I do think that this team should reach at least the playoffs and at least it's not that I'm going to say they should at least replicate the success because we can't necessarily count on Trey Lance starting amazingly from the gun and being able to replicate what we saw last year.
Harder schedule. Yeah.
Exactly. Harder schedule. The travel is always there, and you don't know how he's going to be behind a worse offensive line. If we're being honest, a worse offensive line than he had last year. So to me, I don't know whether it's a Super Bowl or bust kind of thing, but I do think that the team should have Super Bowl aspirations and that they're a contender.
Yeah, and again, like in 2020, right? They also didn't have like as much depth as they did this year or last year. Like 2020, like it was a good year, but like we were I feel like getting overhyped. And the thing is like last in 2020 they didn't have like they had good players, but like they didn't have a lot of good players to back up those good players. Like this year I feel like they have 13 people defensive line that can all just compete. They have 6 or 7 receivers that are all really good. They have 8 offensive linemen that are all pretty solid. They have, I don't know. I think they are deeper than they were in 2020, and he's gotten a lot more prepared. Now, I would have liked to see him maybe get more prepared like earlier on. Like this is what year 6 of his. So I mean, I would have liked to see it earlier because we're already 6 years through. But I think he's going to be again harder schedule, but I think because he has a quarterback who I think will be better. Hopefully they can hit. The only thing I want to see this season differently from last season is that they can hit the ground a little bit more smoothly than they did last season. So
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously they started 2-4 last year, and to me, just to share something different, really, I think the one thing I'm looking for from the team is better division record. Right, last year we went 2-4 in the division, lost
oh yeah.
Seahawks lost both games to the Cardinals and beat the Rams twice. I want at least a 500 record, if not better, from the 49ers. I think in my schedule prediction, in my way too early season ranking, I think I had them at 4-2 in the division. I'm looking to for them to at least go 500, but if not, go 4-2 or better in the division. That really will solidify a playoff ranking for them.
Yeah, that's I mean, both years. Let's see. Last year and then what? In 2019, I believe they were like 3-3. I think they were like
Something like that, yeah.
no, 4-2, 4-2. So I mean, four and
They
two.
were better because they went 13-3. I think, yeah, it was
I think
four.
they split with the Seahawks, they swept the Cardinals and split with
And
the Rams, I believe.
did,
So,
they swept the Rams too.
oh, so they were 5-1. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. That they were good in 2019 versus the division. I want to see that again and again. I mean, I don't know if you think this too, but that division has really NFC West has taken a major step down. It's not top of the league anymore. Like they have NFC West, I think they have two teams that probably will go under 500 this year, the Cardinals and the
Ooh,
Seahawks. So,
interesting.
what do you
I don't think they've necessarily taken a step down. I wouldn't say that. I think instead of taking a step down, I just think another division like the AFC West is taking a step up, right? With the amount of
right.
talent. And to me, it is they have taken a step down, and that obviously the division has experienced some form of regression because when you have such star-studded teams with limited cap space, you're bound to lose a good amount of players, right? The Rams lost a ton of players on offense, defense, and special teams. The 49ers also lost a couple of players on offensively, like a Laken Tomlinson, and then defensively, like a
Yeah,
DK. The Cardinals lost their main edge rusher in Hassan Reddick this year.
it's going to be
So, like
huge.
a couple of guys have been lost from either team. I will push. I don't necessarily think the Cardinals go under 500. If that's the case, that'd be interesting. If it is, it'd probably be 8-9 at the worst. I think they end up still going 9-8 and missing the playoffs. Although it is a tough schedule for the NFC West, especially because other teams have like kind of risen to the challenge, like the AFC West teams that we face, all four of them this year.
Yeah, and didn't they lose JJ Watt as well to retirement, or did he
Ooh,
retire?
I don't think he has retired yet, but obviously he's aging. He's kind of like a
Mhm.
shell of his former self. So that is another thing.
Well, and as well, they also lost Chase Edmonds, and if you don't remember that, like what's the other guy? The other guy. Go say that again.
James Conner?
James Conner, he got injured. Like he's been a very, except from last year, he was a very injury prone back. And now he's going to take like more of that workload. And we've seen with the Steelers, he was a main running back then. Like last year, he wasn't a main workload running back. He was more of like, they took a lot of pressure off of him by inserting Chase Edmonds. This year, there's not as much depth there. So they've lost depth as well as I think Chase Edmonds, if he's going to take the main workload, you're going to expect injuries from him because that's just what he is. So like the Cardinals, I think have taken a major step down as far as like I think their coach never has been good, but as far as their depth, I think they've taken a step down as well.
Yeah, that could be said. And I mean, I think Connor is a little more overrated. He made the Pro Bowl last year, but he only rushed for 3.7 or 3.8 yards per carry. Pretty damn inefficient. And if you have more of a workload, I think that number doesn't tend to get better. So that's one thing for Connor. Not to mention DeAndre Hopkins, obviously suspended for the first 6 games.
Yeah,
They
that's
did
huge.
add Marquise Brown, who can be. Oh, I mean, he was a WR1 when he was with Baltimore, that run first offense, but
Yeah.
after when Hopkins comes back, that's going to be a pretty damn good receiver duo. But at the moment, without Hopkins, that is a completely different team. You're going to have to rely on other players to try and obviously replicate the volume that Hopkins got when he was healthy, or when he obviously plays to the level that he can play. So that's obviously another question. Yeah.
Yeah, they also lost Jordan Hicks, who was a very, very solid linebacker who kind of always gave Jimmy Garoppolo nightmares. I remember he'd always pick him off at least once a game. So, yeah. So, do you want to move on, or do you have anything else?
Yeah, that's good for me.
Yeah. So, last topic of the day, the 49ers defense. Obviously, their defensive line is ranked number one by PFF, but their defense overall, I think a lot of us expect it to be close to top five. If not, I think it's going to be a top five defense for sure next year. But is the 49ers defense overrated, and will they have the best, like, if they're not overrated, will they have the best production that they've had in the Shanahan or in this front offices or Shanahan Lynch, let's say, regime?
It's an interesting question. Overrated for the 49ers defense. I know I saw some metric, maybe it was PFF as well, ranking defensive lines. And I think I saw the 49ers ranked number 6 behind teams like the
Really?
yeah, I think I saw them ranked number 6 on some metric or something like that. I don't know where it came from necessarily, but that in itself, I think, um, tells you that the 49ers defense, while it is ranked pretty highly, I don't necessarily think they're overrated. I think that they might face some regression just based on how teams combat them. But then again, Chris Kosaric has done pretty well. D'Amico Ryans is going into year 2. And so I think that they still have room for growth, especially
Yeah.
because they can relegate now to cover one man once with the addition of Trevor Ward. Remember last year in game 1 when Jason Barrett was there, 49ers wanted to play cover one man. Kyle Shanahan said during State of the Franchise, we brought Ward in because he can cover. I like the zone schemes and all the variability with the defense, but he wanted guys that can cover because he wants to play cover one man. And that really will help not only the cornerbacks, the defensive line, but also the safeties, which might be the weakest group on our defense because it allows Talano, Fungo, or George Odom, both of those guys who are pretty stout tacklers, to operate within the box. And if Jimmy Ward, a versatile safety, wants to play in the box, the 49ers have bodies where they can throw a guy like Dante Johnson out there in the
Yeah.
overhang and have different guys operate different places. And so to me, I think the defensive scheme finally gets to be put in place really this season, and I think that that's important.
Yeah.
So really, it's a look that the 40 or that other offenses haven't necessarily seen from the 49ers in a wider capacity, and that's why I think that they might be in better shape this year. I do think that on paper
Yeah.
this roster is a little better than last year, especially because you added a cornerback number 1 that allows you to operate in the way that you want to. I think the defensive line is still going to operate if as well as last season, maybe like just a little lower in terms of metrics because they did have 47 sacks last year, a sack rate in the top 2 in the NFL. So I agree with your standing. I think that we will be a top 5 defense where we rank in that top 5. It is tough to measure just because defenses don't necessarily only operate by themselves. Also a function of the offense because if an offense is too stagnant, guess what? The defense is on the field longer. More of those third downs come up, more of
Yeah.
those third down conversions, which haunted the 49ers the year before, come up, and that kind of keeps your defense on the field, keeps them more tired. And an offense, if it's scoring really, really quickly, it also puts your defense out on the field for a longer period of time, which then again shares that relationship. So to me, it's all a little subjective as well, but I do believe the 49ers do have at least a top 5, at least a top 10, if not top 5 defense.
Well, and also you gotta remember that last year their corners, like, the first few like the first 8 weeks were horrendous. Like, it was terrible with Josh Norman. And I mean, I remember when we first got Josh Norman, I actually was not like, I was remembering the Josh Norman of old, and I was like, oh, this guy could be pretty good. Well, it turns out I was completely wrong because he was terrible. But again, and then you also have like Sam Womack. Like, I know K'Wan Williams was experienced, but what pick was K'Wan Williams? I'm pretty sure he was like a 5th round pick as well. I mean,
Yeah.
so you have Sam Womack who could easily fill the role of K'Wan Williams, and maybe not this year, but could be I think he could be similar to what K'Wan Williams was. My only concern is what if Hufanga doesn't work out? Then you could have a lot of problems because the depth behind that, I guess you have Dante Johnson who could slide in there as well. But I think they're not overrated. They're a team that, I mean, they lost a few pieces along it, but they also got, like you said, a very good corner. And now that allows them to maybe be a little bit more flexible, play several different styles at once, as like compared to the 2019 year or whatever. I'm not trying to compare, but comparing that to that year they couldn't because they didn't have fast corners. So they can really play both styles now. And it's great. The flexibility, I think, has gotten better. The only other thing is, can they stop the run, which that's a little bit more of a weakness, but I think Eric Armstead and then you have Hassan Ridgeway in the middle I think that would plug and play, and then you have some young guys that you could bring up for that position as well. So
yeah, I agree here.
yeah, so I guess we have nothing really else to discuss. So everyone, this has been a lot of fun. That's Rohan Chakravarthi. Go subscribe to him. It's just his name on YouTube, and then on Twitter, I can't remember what is your Twitter.
Yeah,
Like,
at Rohan Chakrav, just be sure to go ahead, hit me with a follow for any 49ers news. And the other place that I work at, 49ers Web Zone, be sure to check out any of the written content if you kind of like that kind of stuff. Putting out weekly stuff over there as well.
yeah, the links are in the description. I think I had your handles in the description. So, everyone, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for joining me once again, because this was
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been a
nice to
blast
pick.
and glad to do this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll see you guys again later. I should be back this next Saturday. So we'll